News about the upcoming core set rotation has sparked heated discussions within the Hearthstone community. The most shocking announcement was the removal of Shadowstep, a spell without which it's hard to imagine Rogue. I've formed a clear impression that this entire set of changes was made with one specific goal in mind: to increase the impact of the new expansion, and especially of colossal creatures. In this video, together with my fellow mathematicians, we won't just share our opinions. We'll quantify exactly how many strong cards each class has lost, how many weak ones they received in return, and why this might have happened.
Time to rock and roll!
Hello my friends. My name is Bot Mathematician and this is Holomancer.
Also, Chief Investigative Reporter Dora joined us this evening.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop.
The core set rotation traditionally generates heightened interest among Hearthstone players, sometimes even more than the release of new cards.
There are several reasons for this. The core set is the modern successor to the basic set, which originally laid the ideological foundation for every class. Players eagerly await the return of their favorite cards from the past. In addition, the annual addition and removal of cards sheds light on how the developers plan to reshape classes for the upcoming year and which strategies may receive support in future expansions. This year, this is especially relevant, as we believe the current rotation is also aimed at creating favorable conditions for the return of colossal minions.
Despite the fact that the core set consists primarily of very old cards, its overall impact on the metagame is enormous. Throughout the year of the Raptor, its influence fluctuated between 14% and 23%. As of today, when the metagame contains the maximum possible number of cards, 6 expansions and 6 mini-sets, the overall popularity of core set cards stands at 18%, and it remains the most influential set in the game.
Its high impact on the metagame combined with the fact that the set is completely free, makes players pay especially close attention to the usefulness of both added and removed cards.
The overall utility of these cards directly affects players' competitiveness and determines the cost of returning to the game. We have a unique opportunity to measure the usefulness of nearly every card and assess its real significance. For more than 8 years, we've been collecting our own statistics on card popularity and standard. By consolidating all this data and using a specialized system, we can enter a card's name into a cell and reconstruct its entire historical timeline. Identifying the periods when it appeared in popular meta decks, its average and peak popularity, how long it remained relevant, and the scale of its long-term impact on its class.
For this research, the guys used only the average class impact over the past 2 years for cards that are being rotated out and compared it to the total impact of the cards that will be added to the core set. They then summed all utility metrics to clearly illustrate the imbalance between the cards leaving standard and those being introduced. Let's move straight to the examples. It would be unfair to say that Soulbreaker and Deathbringer Sarfang were completely useless. They occasionally appeared in standard across various strategies, but their impact was extremely localized and short-lived. Over a 2-year span, their influence amounted to just slightly above 0%. Although Vampiric Blood was part of the metagame for roughly 80% of those 2 years, for most of 2024 it occupied a rather niche role. Everything changed after the 2025 rotation. The cards stormed back into the game within a wide range of Death Knight strategies: Control, Starship, Suck, Quest, Talanji, and Heron. Despite the tremendous potential of Horn of Winter, we rarely saw it take center stage. Its presence increased significantly after the release of Perils in Paradise, and its peak came as part of the Frost Zerg strategy. However, since the beginning of the current competitive year, the card has seen mostly localized play, primarily due to insufficient support for Frost Rune synergies. The same applies to Stitched Giant. There is no doubt that it is an extremely powerful and valuable card, but Death Knights used it very reluctantly throughout most of its time in Standard. Its impact increased dramatically shortly after the release of the Lost City of Ngoro. It is now a crucial tool for the class, yet its prolonged period of localized usage resulted in a long-term class impact of only 13%. Overall, these statistics clearly demonstrate that even very powerful and versatile cards are not used as frequently as it may seem. The high level of diversity, competition, and heavy reliance on broad synergy significantly limit their consistent presence. The true treasure on this list is Corpse Explosion. Every 4th Death Knight used this card over the past 2 years, and that number could have been even higher if not for the restriction of requiring 2 blood runes. The card became an indispensable cornerstone of blood-based control strategies. Its removal may be directly connected to the return of colossal minions in the upcoming expansion.
By removing 4 highly useful and flexible cards, the developers are offering us 2 new ones whose potential value we can only speculate about. The remaining additions were, under previous conditions, mostly extremely niche.
Historically, the card that had the greatest impact on deck building was Alexandros Mograine, maintaining a consistent 15% class impact throughout its time in Standard. If we sum up all the outgoing cards, we lose a theoretical 62% of total influence and receive only 22% in return. Plus 2 new cards. The likelihood that their utility will be comparable to Corpse Explosion is fairly low, even though they don't appear entirely helpless. For this reason, we believe the overall usefulness of the core set for Death Knight will decrease significantly. But do you know who suffered even more unexpectedly? Demon Hunter. Overall, the cards being rotated out can hardly be called defining, although most of them had localized usefulness and importance at specific stages. The weapon Tuskpiercer had enormous significance in modern class strategies. After entering the core set, it was used far more frequently than after its original release. The card became a key tool that simplified the abuse of death rattle effects. Quite simply, it allowed players to tutor the exact card they needed from their deck, and that is extraordinarily valuable. It appeared in 84% of decks over the course of a year, an incredible figure that fully reflects the class's new, almost extreme ideological direction. I am personally very glad that this card is leaving, as it gives hope for a major revision of design philosophy. However, from a standpoint of utility and impact, the developers are replacing these cards with what can only be described as outright filler, plus 1 new card that supports demon synergy. Tichondrius looks interesting and aligns much more closely with the class's identity, but what is the probability that his long-term impact will be truly defining? In total, the new core cards previously accounted for only 5% utility, while the outgoing ones represented 101%. The imbalance is colossal.
Druid loses its fundamental AoE tool. 2 years ago, Swipe received a buff that reduced its cost from 4 to 3 mana, which naturally increased its usefulness. After that change, its class impact reached 53%. It was an extremely flexible card, effective in both slower decks and spell damage synergies. In practice, Druid is now left without reliable control tools. As for the other cards, they were almost never used. Greybow was the most noticeable among them, but fortunately it never remained dominant for long. The card has enormous abuse potential, and I am glad that this potential was never fully realized under modern conditions. I am also pleased that it is leaving Standard, as this is yet another sign that gives hope for a shift in Standard's overall philosophy. From a purely numerical standpoint, the team is offering an equivalent replacement for Swipe, and even an additional new card, but this equivalence exists only on paper. However, some clarification is necessary. Crystal Merchant was introduced in Saviors of Uldum and had very high impact across 2 expansions. After that, its popularity nearly vanished, which raises serious doubts about whether it can remain relevant today over a long period. Underking follows a similar pattern. The card was extremely influential after the release of March of the Lich King and remained prominent for 2 expansion phases, but then almost disappeared from decks. Despite their strong historical numbers, these cards cannot match the flexibility and universality of Swipe, because their usefulness will directly depend on whether the developers create broad and consistent synergies to support them.
Hunter did not lose anything fundamentally critical. The most notable card for the class was Terror Scale Stalker. It was primarily used in Starship and various egg strategies. This was another abuse-enabling tool that fortunately never spiraled out of control, but I am still glad to see it leave Standard.
In return, players receive several cards that had localized impact in the past, and even their combined historical influence exceeds that of the cards rotating out. It is interesting that the team is giving Hunter tools that destroy random targets, and this happens in parallel with the release of colossal minions, which are essentially not one but multiple bodies. This means that random destruction effects will be heavily mitigated. Deadly Shot, for example, was quite powerful in the past, but in recent times its class impact was only around 1%. Dragonbane, which featured a similar effect, left Standard in 2025, and before that its utility was also just slightly above 1%, although historically it had been much stronger. Based on this, what are the chances that Pressure Plate will be as impactful as it once was? Many people underestimate the scale of Mage's losses, and that is not entirely accurate. The class is losing 3 very useful and flexible cards. The clear standout among them is Primordial Glyph. It is currently the most popular Mage card, and at least the developers found a relatively dostojna replacement in the form of Runed Orb. I am glad that the class is losing part of its mana cheat component. Flame Geyser also received a very solid replacement in the form of First Flame. Overall, in terms of raw numbers, this appears to be an even trade. However, the usefulness of Khadgar, Deep Freeze, and Astromancer will directly depend on the synergies the developers choose to introduce, or not introduce. These cards are not nearly as flexible compared to Arcane Artificer.
It seems the developers intend to significantly weaken Paladin, and I am generally pleased with that. The class is losing cards that had specific use cases, but the biggest blow is the disappearance of Anachronos, a very powerful turnaround card that clearly does not fit into the new ideology and a metagame built around colossal minions. The true celebration is the removal of Crusader Aura, a genuinely awful card from a design standpoint. However, in exchange, the class does not simply receive nothing interesting, it mostly receives very strange cards. The team is building synergy around High Lord Fordragon, and perhaps we will see the emergence of a new Divine Shield archetype. I did not collect statistics during the original release of Coghammer in Goblins vs Gnomes, but I remember the card seeing widespread play. As for Ivory Knight, I did not track it from its release either, but I have never encountered it in popular meta decks in later periods. The most influential card among the additions in the past was Battle Vicar. Whether it can maintain such relevance today remains a major question. The situation for Priest looks catastrophic. The continued presence of Ship's Chirurgeon in the core set makes little sense after the rotation of Zarimi. The impact metric clearly demonstrates the card's dominance within the class over the past 2 years. The popularity numbers for Thrive in the Shadows are even more impressive, largely due to its ability to tutor key cards from the deck, including enabling abuse within combo strategies. Light Bomb was not a defining tool, but its usefulness would almost certainly have increased after the current rotation alongside the return of colossal minions. The developers are deliberately removing such tools to reduce the ability to counter this unique type of threat. In exchange, the class receives cards that can largely be considered filler, as they had no meaningful historical impact, with the exception of Devouring Plague. The only real intrigue lies in the new card, Kalia Menethil. Given the return of colossal minions, this card may enable targeted abuse of a specific minion, which could prove extremely powerful. But only time will tell. For now, the replacement looks far from equivalent.
Without question, the biggest shock for players was the removal of Shadowstep from Standard. On the one hand, this is very good news, as the card served as the primary abuse engine for minion effects.
As overall power levels increased, this very old spell began to create more and more problems. Eventually, this led to Rogue absorbing every tool with combo potential and building its entire gameplay around them. Frankly, that became exhausting. On the other hand, the card is a core part of the class's identity, and its greatest value lies in its ability to generate gameplay. The disappearance of this card does not seem accidental. It may be connected to reducing the influence of abuse-oriented strategies. Or it could be related to the addition of colossal minions. Perhaps the developers do not want Rogue's colossal minion to repeatedly resummon its parts over and over again. And this brings us to the central question. Is it worth fundamentally reshaping the foundation of the game just to introduce a new mechanic?
Its class impact exceeded 80%, clearly demonstrating the class's dependence on it. Another painful loss is Tess. The card dominated last year, but in 2025 it occupied a more niche space. It also reinforced Rogue's identity by encouraging theft-based strategies. In return, players receive Shadow of Demise, a true gem from the past, a spell that will undoubtedly prove highly useful. However, whether the rest of the additions will maintain relevance in modern conditions remains uncertain. Jackpot may lose much of its purpose without Tess. Spy Mistress could signal the return of an aggro archetype. Even though the class received several solid cards, their combined historical utility does not compensate for the current losses.
Unlike Rogue, Shaman did not lose anything truly significant. The only fairly noticeable card is Alakir, but his departure is likely connected to receiving a new version in the upcoming expansion. Menacing Nimbus was a tempo card for elemental strategies, which historically had only localized impact. In return, the class will receive Healing Rain, a spell that was extremely useful in the past. The iconic Totem Golem will also return, and the cherry on top is a completely new card. Overall, Shaman may end up gaining stronger tools than it loses.
A similar situation applies to Warlock. The class does not lose anything fundamentally tied to its identity, but the loss of the Solarium will be particularly painful, especially for the quest archetype. I am not even sure whether that deck will ever become viable again. The second most influential outgoing card was Dark Alley Pact, but it was highly Vostrebhavana only for a relatively short period. In exchange, the class receives Twisting Nether, an extremely expensive but uncompromising removal tool. In the past, it was highly influential, though over time it gradually lost popularity. Considering how Blizzard is removing control tools while introducing colossal minions, this card may become unexpectedly relevant under new circumstances. Void Lord was extremely influential in 2017-2018. It will be interesting to see whether it receives proper support and how it performs in the modern environment. On paper, the class may benefit more from the rotation than it loses, but only time will tell.
Finally, we need to talk about Warrior. Just like Rogue, the class has suffered a massive blow to its identity. Among the 5 rotating cards, Brawl and Shield Slam played a truly critical role. Brawl is the best classic AoE tool that enables Warrior to fulfill its board control function. Shield Slam is the cheapest single target removal that reinforces the importance of armor for the class. Nearly 1/3 of Warrior strategies over the past 2 years actively use these cards, clearly demonstrating their flexibility and universal value across different playstyles. Their loss is enormous. It feels like a deliberate move to make it harder to deal with colossal minions. In exchange, the class receives what can only be described as filler. Sky Raider had the highest historical utility among the additions, but it is not flexible. Its usefulness directly depends on Pirate synergy support. If Warrior receives new cards that make it relevant, it will see play. If not, the card will remain meaningless, regardless of its past performance. The same applies to Warmaul Challenger. The card has potential only if supported by buff synergies or tools that grant immune. On its own, it is almost useless. The remaining additions look equally unpromising.
Let's move to the conclusions. I feel that this rotation, more than previous ones, is aimed at preparing the ground for the upcoming expansion.
We can identify several trends. The first is that ultimate AoE effects and major turnaround tools are being removed to make colossal minions more viable. The developers are not simply bringing back an old type of minion. They intend to build entire strategies around them using the new keyword Herald. With each activation of this mechanic, the summoned parts of colossal minions become stronger, making the eventual summon of the colossal minion itself even more powerful. Now imagine if Death Knight, Druid, Paladin, Priest, or Warrior could neutralize such a massive threat in a straightforward way with a single highly universal card. That would completely undermine the logic behind these new playstyles. Colossal minions appear to be so central to the new metagame that the developers are even willing to sacrifice classic tools like Brawl and possibly even Swipe. Of course, we have not yet seen all the new cards, but the current situation feels unprecedented. We have never seen such an approach before, and it leaves plenty of room for speculation. At the same time, Twisting Nether is returning. This may indicate that we will still receive AoE tools to fight colossal minions, but they will be less flexible and most likely more expensive.
The second trend is that several core set cards deeply integrated into abuse-oriented strategies are being removed. For me personally, this is a very positive sign, pointing toward a broader rethinking of Standard as a whole.
The third trend remains consistent year after year. The majority of cards leaving and returning to Standard are almost useless, and lack clear purpose. The developers continue to tease us with the hope that these cards will find a place in the new metagame.
Based on everything discussed, we feel that the new core set will be significantly weaker compared to this year's version. Flexible cards have been replaced, at best, with tools of localized utility whose impact will depend entirely on narrow synergy support.
Players are forced to lose some beloved and genuinely important class tools, which raises an obvious question. Will the developers' decisions lead to a truly engaging gameplay environment? What alternatives will Rogue receive? Can Warrior preserve its control identity? These are extremely important topics, and for now, there are no clear answers.
Dear viewers, what do you think?
Do you support the rotation of fundamental class cards in order to shape a new metagame? Do you believe the new meta will be exciting?
Let us know your thoughts below and join the polls in your community tab. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to support our content and stay updated.
Traditionally, we want to express our boundless gratitude to our sponsors.
Dear friends, your help is invaluable. We will be grateful for any support.
Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for spending this time with us. We really hope that we will have the opportunity to get in touch in the next video.
Take care of yourself.
And never give up.
Job's done.